We're dealing with limited government resources, the need to move people and freight efficiently and effectively throughout the region. So all of those things come together in this work. So if we didn't need to have the importance of our work underscored before now, we certainly have that importance now. And so your engagement over the many months, your engagement in this meeting is so much appreciated. Let me turn it over to really the staff with that sort of background. The staff will take us through the latest developments. I also want to say that there are some new aspects to their presentation, particularly several case studies, if you will, about how all this might work in practice. And the reason for that is, I think elected officials who are very interested in what this means for their constituents in the real world have asked for a couple examples of how this might actually work. And so that will be a part of the presentation that you'll see that's relatively new. So with that, I'll turn it over to Keith and Mackenzie to take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chairman Snyder, and good morning, everybody. I appreciate the contextual background there regarding the recent Tesla incident. I'm not going to talk about that, but I do concur that, yeah, from NVTA'S perspective, understanding how technology can help the region accomplish its vision and potential pitfalls we need to be on the lookout for are very much themes of the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan. This morning, I'm kind of excited to kind of bring us to the point where we're actually looking for a formal action to recommend to the authority, what we're proposing here with the TTSP action plan in particular, and the strategies that are embodied in this plan. So this is an opportunity to perhaps take a step back before we take a couple of steps further into the detail, as we kind of, I guess, in a sense, make our closing argument for your recommendation, hopefully, in support of the pathway forward that we're proposing. So we'll step through this fairly quickly in the sense of there are some things in here that will be very familiar, and I don't want to dwell on those. But as Chairman Snyder mentioned, there are a few things which are new, which I do want you to kind of have ample time to absorb. So Mackenzie, if you could advance to the next slide. So I'm going to cover, between us, Mackenzie and I are going to cover about 5 different topics here. Why did we develop the TTSP in the first place? What is it? What are the potential benefits and upsides to moving forward with this TTSP? Give you some examples of ways in which we will use the TTSP, and then finally, what are our recommendations and how does the TTSP fit with our mainstream transportation planning and programming activities? So beginning with, why did we develop the TTSP? We wanted to embrace technology within the overarching vision that the authority has for transaction, our long-range plan, and by extension for the region as a whole. That's shown on the screen here. This is not new. Since you last saw it, it is relatively new in that it was approved only in December of last year. But this is the vision. This is the thing that we're trying to accomplish with transaction, to TTSP, and obviously the authority's 6-year program funding investments. Next slide, please. Also not new, but I do want to restate that we are we've established three overarching principles. We call them core values of equity, sustainability, and safety. And these are as much to do with process as they are to do with any particular projects or measures that come out of the TTSP or indeed transaction into which the TTSP will ultimately be integrated. So again, not new, but extremely important that our approach embraces equity, sustainability, and safety. Very topical given Chairman Snyder's earlier comments. And next slide, please. So this graphic, I'm not sure, some of you have seen this before, I'm not sure you've all seen this, but in terms of setting a context for why technology is important and why we need to act, there's this timeline here we looked at, which was actually specifically for the Apple iPhone. We're not endorsing any manufacturer or product. It's just a technology example. And you may recall that 14 years ago, give or take, Apple launched the first iPhone. We're up to iPhone 12, and I think there's something in the works to update beyond the iPhone 12 soon. But that's happened over a 14-year period. So project that forward another 14 years, you get to 2035, and I'll pose the question, which version of the iPhone will we be on in 2035? And keeping in mind that Apple has recently indicated that it's pretty interested in the autonomous vehicle marketplace, and we know when Apple starts looking at things, they tend to go all in, as they have done with the iPhone. So, we can only speculate, but I think it's a valid question. And on the right side of this timeline, we look at NVTA. Now, I'm not being critical of NVTA or any government agency by making this comparison. I think we exist and we operate in different ways. And I think in many regards, NVTA has been very innovative and very fast moving over the less than 2 decades that it's actually been in existence, of which it's only had a revenue stream since 2013. But nonetheless, I'll pose the question: in 2035, where should NVTA be, broadly and specifically in the context of transportation technology? And I say that and give the example that we do transaction every 5 years. We do 6-year program updates every 2 years, and technology is just moving exponentially alongside us. So if we don't take a position on this and set us kind of a strategic approach to addressing technology, then if we feel we're left behind today, how much further behind will we be by 2035? And just for reference, our long-range plan transaction on the current update, we'll be looking out to 2045. So this is well within the range of our long-range plan, and something that we did look at in the previous update, and something we do plan to look at much more closely in the current update. Next slide, please. So those slides have kind of addressed, why have we developed the TTSP? I next want to, with this slide, just talk about what is it, and just to kind of synthesize to a very high level, we consider the strategic plan as a tool that will inform a proactive approach to adoption of transportation technology. Considers how the technologies will support the region's vision. In other words, it's a needs-driven approach, not a technology-driven approach, although sometimes it's hard to separate those. But we do want to keep in mind throughout the region's vision and how can technology help and support, and how can technology potentially prevent us from accomplishing that vision. The TTSP includes 8 strategies, as you're aware, and 9 NVTO roles have been identified. Not all those roles would be executed are implemented by NVTA staff, but probably all 9 of those roles would be initiated by NVTA staff. The TTSP, important point, is a living document. It needs to be a living document so that we can update it as transportation technologies continue to evolve. And that's a significant point I'll come back to in a while. The TTSP action plan will enable NVTA to kind of take a big picture perspective on technology and where we want to be with respect to technology. At the same time, it gives us the pathway to start small, not be over ambitious, but to build momentum over time with respect to the adoption of transportation technologies in the region, some of which we could fund, most of which are going to happen anyway, whether we have a plan or whether we don't have a plan, whether we fund or don't fund. I'm pretty sure Apple is going to be marching ahead with its plans for the iPhone and autonomous vehicles. And so for us, it's not a question of buying into the technology, it's understanding it and having a plan that helps us inform the authority in the region as to how we think they should respond. So that's what the TTSP is. On the next couple of slides, I just want to mention what we see as some of the potential benefits and upsides related to the TTSP. We've identified 6 here. Again, these are pretty high level and probably not an exhaustive list anyway. But we do see the benefits at this stage, allowing us a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach to transportation technologies and how they comport with NVTA's vision or not, and look to respond through one of a number of roles, the 9 roles I've mentioned earlier. More specifically, and in the very short term, as transaction is updated, it will incorporate some scenario analysis, which really enables us to use a data-driven approach to understand how technology and other external factors might influence, undermine even the assumptions and the planning forecast that we use for our long-range planning. So this is kind of, if you like, what-if scenarios that we can undertake with a tool that will actually give us some reliable data on what the range of possibilities might be with technologies and other things that we're aware of and concerned about. Third expected benefit is that this the TTSP enables a consistent approach to NVTA specific technology investments, which in turn will increase synergies and maximize the return on our investments and taxpayer dollars in general. Fourth benefit is that it will facilitate coordinated planning, deployment, and operations. Even if we don't do some of those things at NVTA, we want to use real-time information, but we want it to be secure information. We want to enhance multimodal travel choices and in short, contribute to a more seamless travel experience for Northern Virginians who don't necessarily worry too much about the jurisdiction in which they live or the jurisdictions in which they're passing through towards their final destination. It's much more about the journey and the reason why they're making that journey. And we think technology can help with that. Fifth, by raising awareness and understanding, we think we have a role we can play in informing Northern Virginians about transportation technologies to kind of cut away the myths and the legends and focus on the facts and provide an even-handed and consistent messaging approach regarding technology within Northern Virginia. And as always, we looked at every opportunity, and the TTSP has certainly been one of those to have open and regular exchange of ideas between staff at NVTA and at member jurisdictions and agency partners, all of which strengthens a regional approach to transportation technologies. And certainly I would emphasize within there, we don't see the region ending at the boundaries of Prince William, Loudoun, Fairfax and Arlington. Obviously, we're part of a Commonwealth, we're part of a larger region, and indeed at some scale, some of these things are national and international. But we want to play our part with our partners in that collaborative approach. Next slide, please. So on the left of this table, you see the 8 recommended strategies. A couple of points I want to raise on a couple of these, and to the right, a long-term intent of the strategy with respect to each of these strategies. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I do just want to note for strategy number 7, you see some text highlighted in red. This indicates a staff-initiated change to wording based on a comment we received actually from one of our member jurisdiction staff. Previously, the wording here said, instead of the red text, it says something like for all modes. And question was raised whether we really wanted to say all modes. There's not really any leeway when you use the word all, and we thought that was a fair point, and it possibly was an overreach on our part to try and do all modes. So we kind of clarified that by using in the transportation system, enhanced regional coordination, encourage interoperability in the transportation system, because we felt that was more close to the intent that we had, for one thing. And also, if you look at strategy number 8, we were already referring to the transportation system. So it actually added a bit of consistency in the wording between different strategies. So it doesn't change any of the work that is behind this strategy in the action plan. It is, we felt, a bit of wordsmithing that would actually give us a bit more flexibility moving forward without changing any intent. I would also like to reference strategy number 5. We've not made any changing to the wording of strategy number 5, but you do see it references develop pricing mechanisms that manage travel demand and provide sustainable travel options. In the intent part of, for this strategy, we in addition to kind of the pricing side of things here, we do specifically call out incentives, and really. We do feel that incentives and pricing are basically the same thing in a way. But a bit perhaps, if you can think of carrots and sticks, with the carrot being incentives and the sticks being pricing. So really the mechanisms are important, but they can be used both to to kind of create travel behavioral changes by incentivizing someone to do something, or charging someone to do something if that is a behavior that is something that the region considers should be addressed. So we're not proposing at this stage to change the wording of this strategy, but as we go through this conversation, we'll be interested in your views as to whether we should insert the word incentives into the strategy title, so it would read something more like develop incentive and pricing mechanisms that manage travel demands. We didn't want to make that change. We felt it was just a little bit too much beyond a simple wordsmithing, and also if we were to make that change, we'd actually have to run through the whole document and make sure we made that change consistently throughout the document before we could kind of move ahead. So we believe we have time to make that change between now and the May authority meeting, but we didn't want to make that change without reviewing it with you first. So we'll come back to that in a short while. If we could move on to the next slide, Mackenzie. So this is a restatement of the strategies alongside the NVTA roles. It's just here for reference. I don't really plan to talk about this slide any more than we've talked about it in the past, other than to say it is really setting up the examples that Chairman Snyder mentioned earlier that Mackenzie is going to address in just a moment. We do refer to these strategies and in part to the roles in the example. So we just wanted to have this kind of fresh in mind. I'd also like to restate what we've said on numerous occasions, that although these strategies are numbered, that number should not be inferred to portray some sense of prioritization or even a timeline or an order in which things would be done. They're just simply numbered the way they came out. So I just wanted to restate that again. It's not a prioritization. I think as we transition from me to Mackenzie, I'll certainly take a pause and invite any comments or questions, including on that point I raised about introducing the word incentives into one of the strategies before we move on.
I have a question.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay. Could you give an example of what an incentive would be, and would the NVTA fund that incentive? Can you just elaborate on that a wee bit?
Sure. Mackenzie, if you could just go back to that slide. I think the easiest example I can give you right now of an incentive would be to refer to the joint initiative between NVTA and the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Regional Multimodal Mobility Program, RM3P, which we've referenced, and is also referenced within the TTSP. Part of the RM3P is looking at the very innovative use of essentially rewarding people for travel behaviors that help optimization of transportation system performance. So I guess the simplest example we could give you, although this is not necessarily something that will actually happen, but just by way of an example, if there was a crash on a freeway and VDOT were anticipating that the clearance time for that crash was going to cause congestion to build and build and build for hours, and people are going to get caught up in that, and it's going to cause real disruption on the system. That if a proportion of people who would be traveling during that time period could be persuaded to delay their journey or deviate on routes to, say, a Starbucks, then RM3P or the RM3P vendor would provide, say, a gift card to Starbucks that if that traveler actually took that action, that they could have a free latte or a slice of lemon pound cake or whatever. If by doing that they were able to essentially inconvenience themselves for the greater good of the system operation, then their reward would be a latte or a slice of pound cake. It sounds kind of like almost like a flippant example, but I mean it is an example of the sort of thing that could happen, and that is actually being developed as part of RM3P. In terms of your question about payments, the intent for Strategy 5 actually talks about revenues being reinvested in equitable solutions, and so if there's a revenue stream that's being generated through the pricing mechanism, as we see today on the express lanes, people are already paying at peak times to travel and get a higher quality, more reliable travel experience on the express lanes, that money be reinvested in the transportation system in some way. But equally, you could extend, and this is all very theoretical, we don't have any detailed plans to do this, but if there is a pricing mechanism being applied, then that pricing mechanism could actually be the means to pay for the incentives. I kind of hesitate to give this example, but it's one that I can't recall specifically. I need to look up where I saw it and what country it refers to, but it was almost certainly a European country and probably a Scandinavian country, where they had approached to speed enforcement, where instead of fining people who were speeding, they were sending money to people who were compliant with the speed limit. And it kind of had the same effect, but instead of using the stick approach to the violators, they used the carrot approach to the those who were compliant. And so it's the sort of innovative thing that, you know, doesn't kind of fit naturally with the traditional way things have been done in the past. But we feel that there are good reasons to at least explore whether these things give us different tools and technology. You know, if it were not for technology, these options would not exist, right? I mean, you can't stop someone at the roadside and say, hey, there's a crash ahead. You know, if you go to Starbucks, here's a $5 gift card. You know, that just doesn't work with human invention and no technology. So we're looking to see here what technology can do, which traditional approaches cannot. Without putting Kathy on the spot, whether there's anything, Kathy, since I mentioned RM3P and since you are the principal for the entire RM3P initiative, I want to feel as though I would like to give you the opportunity to react to anything I said if it was inappropriate.
No, I think you did a great job of describing how we envision incentives, but they don't all have to have a monetary value. Well, I guess they're probably all going to have some sort of monetary value, but you know, we could incentivize people to change their trip time, change their trip mode, or their route. And, you know, some incentives could actually involve reduced transit fares or free parking at a metro station, those kinds of things that, you know, aren't necessarily commercial benefits like the Starbucks example. But I think the combination of multiple possibilities for incentives will help us to capture a broader audience. And so we're really enthusiastic about it, but we recognize that the program has to be designed in such a way that it is sustainable over the long term without public dollars being spent on those incentives. And so that's what we're working towards now, and we'll be working really hard with our vendor when one is selected to make sure that we're able to do that.
I'd like to say, Keith, I'm a big fan of using the word incentive. I worry when I see pricing, people think about congestion pricing, which is the standard economist answer to everything. I think that's very clunky. It's tough politically to sort of say all the voters will now have to pay. I like the targeted, I like the incentive pricing very much. I know the city of Nashville, the metropolitan area of Nashville, is going to be providing this to everybody who moved from single occupancy vehicles. I think it has tremendous potential. I was a little surprised on your next chart. You show that funding from NVTA is blank on that. I don't know why that would be blank.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Dick. In terms of NVTA funding, I think it's, Dick, to answer your question, it's really it's blank because we're reflecting the fact that the way Virginia code is written, you know, NVTA cannot directly fund operations, maintenance activities. So I'm not sure what our role from a funding perspective would be under the current Virginia code, and that's why we left it blank.
But to me, it's a way of, I agree, it's not, you're not making a direct investment in capital, but it means you don't have to make as large a direct investment in capital. It's the flip side of it.
No, Dick, you're absolutely right. But just making sure we're in compliance with the Code of Virginia regarding the use of the regional revenues. But having said that, there are other funding sources are available that can be used for the operational component. But for us, we do toe a fine line regarding what's capital, new infrastructure, new investment versus what's operational and maintenance.
Fair enough. No, I don't want to see any of you guys go to jail.
Not do we?
And we appreciate that, Dan.
But Dick, maybe we should talk to some legislators and see what they're interested in.
I think that
I would caution, because there would be a waterfall effect. I'm concerned about that.
Yeah.
It does come up, but then it's like, where do you draw the line? We could really, but that's a separate conversation.
Right. We do not want the legislation opened up again.
no, I agree on that. No, I don't.
Thank you. That was a great explanation. Thank you all.
Yeah, it really was a good discussion. For me, it's a little bit of an eye-opener about how dramatically the whole priorities and sort of procedures for funding transportation might change in the near future. So useful, very useful for that purpose. I hadn't really focused on the incentives. There are already some incentives provided, the tax, how does it go? The transit parking tax thing. So there are already in the system some incentives, but really at a rudimentary level. So this discussion, I think, points to the importance of this work, not only on technology, but maybe beginning to have us look at a much larger issue about how we actually go about our expenditures and how they are prioritized and what might achieve the maximum impact for safety, sustainability, and equity. Anyway, thanks a lot for that. Keep along here. I think we need to, make sure that we get through everything and have a discussion. So thanks.
Okay. Well, at this point, I'll hand over to Mackenzie to talk through the examples, which is new material.
Great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Keith and Chairman Snyder, and everyone. Good morning. I'll be walking you through 2 examples of how the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan could be applied in evaluating technologies as they enter the region. We wanted to give you talk about 2 technologies that are widely familiar and in fact have a real world example in the region. And are closely related to one another, but with some key distinctions so that we can see how the TTSP is capable of dealing with even nuanced differences. I do want to point out that the examples you'll see today are illustrative and not necessarily what the final analysis of these technologies will be when they do enter the region or when we do apply the TTSP. These are just examples for today. I will go through both of these quickly, and then I'll pause to see if you have any questions about them. So our first example is electric and autonomous transit shuttles. And there's a real world example of the relay shuttle in the Merrifield region, actually right outside the NVTA office. And here you can see on your screen that we've noted some of the features of this technology, including that it's not reliant on an infrastructure type and is ADA accessible, meaning that it has some equity analysis involved with it. We've also made a few assumptions. And again, this is a feature of these being examples for the time being. But an assumption that we've made in this case is that there's already been a successful pilot and that public acceptance of the technology is growing. And you'll see that the assumptions differ with the technologies as well. Finally, I'll point out that on the next slide, you'll see some ratings, and I wanted to give you an idea of what those are and how they'll be applied before we move into some more detail. You'll see 3 stoplight type icons here. One is moving from left to right, red, yellow, and green. Red means that we anticipate the TTSP would recommend intervention, not necessarily any sort of pause in adopting the technology, but that maybe additional action is needed in bringing its full benefits and mitigating some of the potential challenges. Yellow would indicate that the TTSP might recommend proceeding with caution, but there might be some action needed to make sure we're maximizing those benefits. And green means that the TTSP would likely recommend embracing that technology. And that's not to say there would be no action on NVTA's part, but it is the technology might be more likely to have benefits than negatives. And so it's just finding that right balance. So we'll move on to a little bit more detail. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see the whole picture here. Great. So this is an overview of what an analysis of electric and autonomous shuttles could look like when using the TTSP as a tool to evaluate its entry into the region. You see that first we look at how it might address the vision statement and be compliant with it. And you'll see that these bolded words here are related to the core values that are talked about as primary objectives of the TTSP. Next, we'll look at each core value individually. And again, those are equity, sustainability, and safety, and how the individual technology might address or interact with those core values. I'll give you an example here. For electric and autonomous shuttles, if we look at it through the lens of equity, we think that this technology could help with first and last mile connections and potentially improve access for more people to the transit system, which would make it very beneficial. Some actions that might result from this analysis are encouraging diverse and public outreach that starts with identifying needs through listening to make sure we can maximize some of those benefits, and other actions like conducting public education to make sure that we're sharing the word about those potential benefits. In the next section of this chart, we look at the 8 strategies, and again, they're numbered there 1 through 8, but that's not priority order, and I'd be happy to go back to the names of those strategies if anyone needs that. And we place a check mark beside that strategy if the technology has the potential to interact with it. Finally, we'll look at the sub-actions that the TTSP action plan recommends based on the strategies. And the reason that there is one section of sub-actions for all 8 of those strategies is because some of the strategies would recommend the same action. For example, strategies 1, 2, and 3 might all recommend incorporating consideration of the technology into transaction or the 6-year program project selection process. You'll see that here in this case, we do not place a check mark beside strategy number 4, and that's just because it might not be directly applicable to this particular technology. The next technology example is personal electric autonomous vehicles. And you'll see that the difference here is that these are for personal use, but they're still using many of the same technologies. And this allows us to see how the TTSP could be versatile enough to acknowledge these nuanced differences. In this example, we will assume that the personal autonomous vehicles are level 5, which means that they can be operated autonomously under all conditions, meaning that a human driver does not need to interact with the vehicle regardless of weather or any other road conditions. We'll also assume that public acceptance of the technology is growing and that they're beginning to enter the marketplace and be publicly available for purchase. Again, we'll use the same ratings here of red, yellow, and green, moving from intervention needed to embracing the technology. And we'll go through the same process. First, we'll see how do personal electric autonomous vehicles interact with our vision statement? And next, how does it receive our core values, or how would it interact with our core values? You'll see here that we have our first red icon in the category of equity. And again, that does not mean that there's any sort of pause or resistance needed, but just that perhaps additional intervention is needed to make sure we're achieving the benefits and avoiding some of the potential negative impacts. I'll go through an example of what that might mean. In terms of equity, we think the TTSP might evaluate personal autonomous vehicles to contribute to generating revenues that could be reinvested in other programs, such as public transit, and may contribute to more reliable travel times in the region. However, they might be cost prohibitive for individual ownership at the onset of their introduction to the market. So we'll need to take careful intervention to make sure that those things are balanced in a way that creates outcomes that are beneficial to the entire community. So you'll see some of the actions recommended here would be things like developing white papers to analyze research and identify best practices to accommodate this mode in a way that's consistent with NVTA's core values and vision statements. After we've looked at all three core values, we'll again look to the strategies and see which of them would be applicable or should be evoked in adopting or reacting to the addition of this technology to the region. And we see here that all 8 strategies might be relevant in this case. And we provide a list of sub-actions that are a summary of all actions for these strategies, including developing and supporting policies regarding EV charging infrastructure and pricing mechanisms, and discouraging zero occupancy passenger vehicles miles traveled. With that, I will pause and see if you have any questions about these examples or how the TTSP could be applied. Yes, I see Mayor Michelle.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused as to exactly what the red means. Does intervention needed mean that there is a potential problem?
No, red would mean that we would need additional action to maximize those benefits. For example, you might need to make sure that there are equity aspects to your policies that you're adopting, and additional care might be needed to make sure that they are satisfactorily addressing those needs of the community. So not so much there's a problem, but that you need to pay more attention to make sure you're maximizing the benefits without creating any negative externalities.
Okay, so there's potential pitfalls that we would need to be sure that we would not fall into. Okay, thank you.
Right. Yes.
Other comments on this? I have a specific comment on the personal electric autonomous vehicles. I would make sustainability green and safety yellow. I know that that's micro commenting, if there is such a word, but I think in view of the Tesla situation, I think the safety issues continue to be real. Offsetting, of course, the positives of reducing driver behavior, but have we introduced new risk? Sustainability, I would give it a very high mark. I'm not even sure why that would be other than green. So hopefully we can make those changes. But I think this illustrates the complexity of this. Take equity, for example. The most obvious thing is it's highly likely that these functionalities will be added to the higher end vehicles and then work their way down through the cheaper vehicles. And then if you can't afford to buy a new vehicle, you're left out totally until those vehicles become used vehicles. So there's an equity issue. On the other hand, if your sustainability is high and you're reducing air pollution, which would affect particularly underserved territories, then you actually have an equity plus. So, this shows the complexity, but I think it's useful to have these examples. So let me turn it over to the group. Does the group agree that we should have the examples? Are you generally satisfied with the examples? Literally as sort of pilot tests as to how you would take this planning document, the next step into actual action by the authority in its plans and potentially in its funding.
Yeah, I like the examples. I've got a bunch of nitpicking comments to make. But
So staff, how do you want to deal with that? Do you want to deal with those comments now? Do you want to get them in email later, make minor, hopefully changes within the context of this, or staff, how do you want to do that? Because I think this meeting is supposed to go until what, 10?
Yeah,
So-
Chairman Snyder, if I may, we certainly want to hear the comments, but I think in the interest of time, it's probably preferable for the group as a whole to deal with that offline. We could do that, by phone or preferably by email. I think I just want to reinforce what Mackenzie said is, we want you to kind of consider the methodology associated with these examples, not so much the ratings themselves. The ratings are there to be, indicative, illustrative, but then they're certainly in no way meant to imply that they're the final position that we would have. And indeed, it's possible, as you and others have mentioned, that for each of these core values in particular, there are components which might be green, yellow, or red, and others that might not, might be another color. And so how we kind of take a series of sub-rating colors and combine them into a single one is a process in and of itself. So it's really the example that we're trying to, the example of how we would use it, rather than the actual outcomes that are indicated by the color coding that we'd like you to focus on.
Dick, are you okay with that? It is.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm not sure my comments are all nitpicking, but I'm perfectly happy to do it offline. I'll send an email out with some change. I like the structure of what they're trying to do.
Okay. Good. Well,
Chair Snyder.
Aaron?
I just want to say that I agree with Chair Snyder's remarks about the autonomous vehicles. I think we need to acknowledge risk in some way. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for that. So Dick, if that's okay with you, and then you and
Yeah,
staff get together with regard
Yeah.
to comments, and we'll hopefully be able to add them in to these examples. Okay. All right, let's move forward then. Staff, Mackenzie or Keith?
Thank you, Chairman Snyder. I'll take it from here. Mackenzie, if you could advance. So we've talked about 4 of the 5 things I wanted to cover. We cover why did we develop the TTSP? What is it? What are the benefits? And as Mackenzie has just gone through examples of how it could be used. So I just want to wrap up now with, what are our recommendations and how does this all fit with NVTA'S primary responsibilities of transportation planning and programming. So let me start with the recommendations. We are requesting that you approve or recommend that the authority approve the 8 TTSP strategies. For now, we can leave the well. I mean, you can tell us if you'd like to approve this, but as we discussed earlier about incentives, if you'd like us to incorporate incentives, we're happy to take that as a kind of like a condition on your recommendations. But essentially, we'd like you to consider taking the action to approve the 8 strategies and the action plan, but not the entire TTSP document. And I'll explain why in just a moment. In approving the action plan, we do want to be absolutely clear that if there is anything that would require a significant change to the TTSP, be that a change or an addition, anything that is significant as determined by Ms. Backman would not occur without authority approval. So we want to throw in that safeguard that, we're not going to run riot with this. We're going to take a very measured approach. But so in approving the action plan, we want you to understand that would be the case. If we would go to the next slide, we're not looking for you to approve the 100 or so page TTSP document for the very simple reason it has to be a living document to reflect the continued evolution of transportation technology. So any any decision you take here today is not locking you or us into that specific document. It's that is foundational to what we're doing, but that's not what we are looking for approval of. So we can maintain that flexibility as things change, particularly external things change. That's how we'll approach that. Next slide, please. The next couple of slides talk about some possible outcomes. This is not new. We shared this with you previously. So, we talked about how this would fold into the transaction scenario analysis, looking at NVTA initiated outreach and education, potential updates to NVTA'S legislative program. Next slide, please. Potential future changes to transaction and our funding process, and this wouldn't happen until after the transaction update is completed at the end of next calendar year. Any number of things could cause our 6-year program process to be modified. TTSP and transaction are one of those, but certainly not the only reasons that may change. Our approach to funding is unchanged, but if there are specific technology projects that the authority should consider funding, they need to be in transaction, and we've been working with jurisdiction and agency staff to that end. Inclusion in transaction does not guarantee funding. Exclusion from transaction does guarantee we cannot use NVTA'S regional revenues for such projects. We do feel that developing some white papers is the next important thing we need to do. We talked about incentives and how that might work. The question has been asked about, NVTA'S role in funding and opening up the code. I think the appropriate initial steps have to be to really understand the issues related to the technologies and how they may or may not help us. And I think that these white papers need to come first. And before we can even start developing white papers, we need to even have a policy, not policy, but a process for developing white papers. We've never actually developed regional transportation policy before, so we need to really think carefully about how that would even work. There's also the potential for human services transportation. I think that was meant to be on the white paper list. Next slide. So that are the possible outcomes from the action plan, taking a longer view, looking much more closely at the next 6 months or so. Here we list some more specific examples of what we would be looking to do. So again, the transaction scenario analysis is close and urgent. Public engagement under the transaction umbrella, we would plan to do that in the spring. We continue to monitor market trends and trigger these external trigger points. We want to develop a more comprehensive approach to outreach and education. We already do the Driven by Innovation e-blast. Hopefully you're all subscribing to that. I think we're looking to kind of reinforce that effort first, but we'd look to the approval of the action plan to really get that moving. As I say, collaborate on a process for development of transportation policies, and then begin to develop those white papers. Obviously, implicit in all of this is implementation of the methodology that Mackenzie outlined earlier. I mean, because that really drives how we react to different types of technologies under each of the strategies. I think I've got one more slide. So in terms of review and reporting, we had talked previously about having formal 6-month reviews on this. We reflected on that and felt that as much as that would help with transparency, accountability, and putting enforced pauses in the work to ensure that everyone was comfortable with the implementation of the action plan, we actually felt that that was a bit inflexible. So what we're proposing we would do from the point of view of reporting in particular is Ms. Backman has a monthly executive director's report that she includes for the authority meetings, and we would look to use that report to provide a monthly update. So much more frequently than 6 monthly, provide a monthly update on progress that we're making with the action plan, so that everyone, it's a publicly available document, can view that progress off the same source material. And as I say, we would also, as part of that reporting, incorporate our thinking on any significant topics that are coming up that require a more formal response, which, to be honest, shouldn't wait for 6 months. If there's federal legislation that's hitting now and we need to respond now, then it doesn't make sense to wait 6 months for a formal review. We would probably need to intervene and act sooner in that case. But so the 6 month thing didn't really work particularly well. So this is kind of the revised approach that we're taking. So sorry that was a bit rushed, but I do want to give you the opportunity to kind of consider the action that we've proposed, whether you're prepared to support that at this time, any tweaks or changes you'd like to make to that. So I'll hand back to Chairman Snyder.
Sure. Mayor Russo, just a minute. Could you go back to the proposed action slide? Because I think that's where we need to focus now. I think it was like 3 slides back, maybe. There you go. Mayor Russo, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I have a concern about the word incentive. Actually, it's more of a question, I guess. If we include the word incentive, and since the NVTA cannot fund it, does the inclusion serve as sort of like a wedge for those who want to have the authority fund other items that we're not legally able to fund?
I am not a legislative expert, so I kind of would need to default to Monica on that.
Well, and thank you for the question, Mayor Rischel. And I would note, this is why we are doing this effort in partnership with the various entities that are on the committee as well. And Keith noted earlier the RM3P initiative that we're doing in partnership with the Commonwealth, where we've stated previously, the authority cannot undertake all of this, and nor should we, particularly by ourselves, because this effort really extends beyond the authority. It's about what we all can do from a technology perspective to get to the efficiency, the equity, the improved quality of life, the reduced VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, all of that. So while the authority is not in a position to fund everything, and I don't think we should be the sole funding entity on it, I think we have others who are part of the committee who bring various aspects, or in addition to various aspects, revenue sources that can be used to advance some of the initiatives or incentivize, if you will. I know Kathy isn't on the phone any longer, but RM3P, we are looking at funding incentives and just trying to understand the rollout of the Biden infrastructure plan. Will there be opportunities for funding on the federal level? What's going on with the Virginia General Assembly, given that they have a huge focus, and with some of the bills that passed regarding electric vehicles and things of that nature. And my whole point is, I think that we should work collectively and collaboratively, and that it shouldn't be solely on the authority. We are a part of it, but we need everyone really to embrace this initiative.
Thank you, Ms. Backman. I appreciate that. And I come from the perspective, like Mr. Mudge, I like incentives. I just didn't want to have something come back and bite us. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Good conversation. And maybe we can drop a footnote somewhere where we talk about incentives and just you know, as permissible or something like that to make clear on that point. Mara, good point. So recommendations from this group. So let me suggest some modifications, and I'll drive Monica and staff crazy with this because I'll go off script here. The first one might be a formal forwarding to the NVTA of the TTSP. We're not suggesting that we approve each and every word in it, but it is far enough along in its totality that we believe it ought to be forwarded. And I assume the action at NVTA would be to accept it. Not necessarily approve it, but accept it. So it's there. We have a foundation. Now, Keith and Monica, have we already done that? And if we have, then we don't need to do it again. But have we done even that so far?
Chairman Snyder, we have not forwarded the TTSP document to the authority as a body at this stage. We've reached version 10 of the document. You know, we believe that, you know, with the caveat that it's a living document and there will be a version 11 at some point in time. We believe this is like a pretty stable endpoint. Certainly between now and the May authority meeting, there's certainly time and room to wordsmith it, but I consider it stable, and our plan for going to the authority meeting in May would be to include it in the meeting packet, so that it's formally on the record. But we just don't want the authority to have to take any action on it, but to be aware that it exists and it is the foundation for all of what we are asking the authority to take, or hopefully asking the authority to take action on in May, which are the 8 strategies themselves and the action plan.
Okay, so I would suggest the first recommendation would be to formally forward the TTSB to NVTA, and I would just leave it there. You're not asking for approval from NVTA, but we're saying we think this is sufficiently far along that it ought to be formally submitted. Otherwise, you know, the context is lacking. So a formal action, would anyone propose that? And then we'll see if there's any discussion or any abstentions or no votes.
I would propose that. Is that a motion? If it's a motion, I move it, but is it what do you want?
Okay, so the mayor, if I could word it, Mayor Rischel moves that the TTSB document be formally submitted to the NVTA for further any I don't know for what discussion. Monica, help me here. What or just leave it with formally forwarded to NVTA. How's that? We're silent on what we expect NVTA to do with it. Does that work, Mayor Rischel?
Yes, I'm fine with that if Ms. Backman is fine with that. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Next one then, the approve. Now, this is a different kind of an action. Approve the 8 TTSP strategies as described in the document. And recall those 8 strategies. Do you want to bring them back up again, Mackenzie, if you could?
I'm sorry, Mr. Snyder. I'm having problems with my audio. I'm working on it. Can you please repeat?
Okay, I hear you now.
Okay. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you and I was trying to log off or log onto my phone. Can you please repeat?
Yes, so we approve the formal forwarding of the TTSP document to NVTA. That was
Yes.
the first action that passed unanimously. Second action is the requested action to formally approve the 8 strategies. Does someone want to move that?
I'll move that.
Okay, if Mudge moves, Mayor Rachel, can you second that?
I'll second that.
He seconds it. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining?
Aye.
Okay, that's action number 2, which is to formally recommend these 8 strategies to NVTA. Is that right, Monica? Okay.
Question?
Third action, you want to go back to recommended actions then?
I have a question.
Yes,
We,
ma'am.
we approved the phrase "in the transportation system."
Yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, that was a good change.
Recommendations. Okay, yeah. Then the number 2 on here, which is actually our number 3 action, approve the TTSP action plan. And then there are the subject languages. I think what this is doing is saying we're approving this as a recommendation, but we realize that the NVTA is going to have to do various things in order to take action on the action plan, if you will. Do people understand what recommendation 2 on this slide, but actually 3 is saying? Okay, I'll entertain a motion then to approve what on this slide appears as recommendation 2.
So moved.
Marisha
Second.
moves,
Second.
seconds. Any further discussion on this? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any no votes or abstentions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much. That's a lot of good work. 3 recommendations, a huge amount of this group's work and staff work went into this. So I guess we come now to reports. Well, let me go back to Keith and Mackenzie. Mackenzie, anything here else that you want to discuss with us?
Chairman, I think yeah, from staff perspective, we greatly appreciate all the inputs you've and guidance you've given over the last couple of years, and to reach this point, and we thank you profoundly for your support in taking this to the next step.
Yeah, so I think what we've done here is we've piled the stones up for the foundation, but that's what it is. And now the interesting thing will be how this is all embedded in both our plans and our funding and project selection. Those are all ultimate questions. That's the structure that we build from here. Monica, did you have any further comments at this point?
Well, thank you, and my apologies for my technical issues. I was trying to log on through my phone. I think my internet at home is causing me issues, but I want to thank everyone for your time that you put in this effort and understanding the significance and importance of this effort. And this is to the authority members that are part of the committee and everyone else. I think this is truly transformative. We started with this back in 2019, if you can believe that. And then looking at where we are today, I think we have a solid product that can not only be embraced by the region, but something that really can be explored by the Commonwealth as a whole. So thank you. We look forward to sharing this with the authority. Assuming we get authority adoption of the action plan. I think we're looking at quarterly meetings for this group, but I do want to thank you because this was really a collaborative effort by all involved. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else for the meeting this morning? Well, let me go back to Keith and Mackenzie. Monica, next meeting, roughly, when do we expect that might occur? Do we have a particular date in mind, or just leave it at the for the call of the group later on?
So I think we're looking at a May action on this, correct, Keith?
Yeah, May action by the authority. That being the case, then I think it would be, as Monica suggested, it'd be appropriate to move the frequency of the TTC meetings to quarterly, and we update you on progress, and you update us and give us advice on what you see happening in the technology world, and perhaps we can return to having some presentations by TTC members on the particular initiatives that they're working on related to transportation technology, and we'll keep you informed that way. But we don't have a specific date in mind, so we should probably do that through some sort of doodle poll in the next week or so.
Okay, thanks for that. Do any members want to bring anything to our attention this morning?
I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thanks to staff. Thanks to all the attendees. David, Chair Snyder, thank you for your leadership.
Well, the thanks go to everybody, believe me,
Yeah.
for sure.
Chairman Snyder.
Yes.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this committee, and I'm going to take up on Monica's offer for the Commonwealth to take advantage of and use this material. There is a lot of good material, and I'm looking at that and saying, wow, a lot of this good work can be used across the Commonwealth. And I definitely, from VDOT perspective, adapt some of this or shamelessly plagiarize, if that's okay with the committee. And in utilizing this, it's a lot of good work and hard work from the NVTA'S staff for putting this together in a cohesive, comprehensive manner. And that could be used by many across the Commonwealth, not only VDOT, probably, I'm sure, many other MPOs and other agencies across the state could actually use this material. So it's not specific to NVTA. And I am not sure, Monica, and if you're open to sharing this broadly with other MPOs, or maybe after NVTA board approves it, or I think there is a lot of value in this the entire Commonwealth should take advantage of. And I want to thank the board as well as the staff of NVTA to put this together. So thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, for sure. And look, we know there's going to be a lot of activity at VDOT in Richmond, in Washington, at the federal level. I think we're going to have a very busy immediate future on this. So it's exciting to get some basics down and to have a framework to move forward. So thanks so much for state participation. Thanks for the private sector participation, other governmental agencies, COGS participation. And does anyone have anything else for this morning?
Well done. Staying power on this is tough, but it's a good end product.
Chairman Snyder, if I may add something.
Sure.
In response to Hari's comment about sharing with MPOs, we are applying for a session to the American MPO Conference on the TTSP. We haven't finished the submission or received the verdict yet, but I wanted to let you know that kind of work is underway.
Okay, great. Excellent. Excellent. Well, then we'll entertain a motion to adjourn, again, with thanks to everyone involved in this effort. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Mayor, thank you so much. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify that now. We are adjourned, and thumbs up to everybody involved, and thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank
Bye.
you.